Hi, so I just want to give a short talk on what for me is one of the most important aspects of piano technique. Now, to give the background, probably the most popular point of view is the idea that after you move the key, you should then relax immediately afterwards. I want to go quite deeply into this as to why that works for some people, whereas for myself, that causes nothing but bother, and I have to work in a very different way in order to get free, easy movements. Now, what I believe, basically, I've got a rational explanation that I'll show shortly as to why I believe that when we succeed, we're probably all doing basically the same thing, but tuning into different aspects of it. So I'll show why that's the case shortly, but firstly, I'll demonstrate a little bit more on the keyboard. So for myself, if I move the piano key, I tend to push out of the key, make sure my hand stands nice and tall. I'm exaggerating, of course, I don't do it as extreme as this on every note, but I want to get into that nice tall position, standing up on the keys. Once I'm there, if I were to then think of relaxing my finger, I tend to do this very literally. If I think of relaxing, my hand caves in, it works a lot harder, it becomes strenuous because of relaxing, whereas if I just stand tall on the finger, stay tall there, keep the wrist nice and loose, of course. I'm not talking about locking anything at all. Just the finger carries on standing tall in balance, and that's how I get freedom. If I don't work that way, I become much more stiff, much more imbalanced. Now, even if I were to just think, say, of reducing the pressure of the key into the key bed, for me, even that can cause problems. So if I'm too light here in the key bed, my upper arm is probably going to work a lot harder to stabilise because my hand doesn't feel properly grounded. So, of course, I would never want to be sunk in the keys like this. If I played this way in the first place, then, of course, I'd have something to relax from afterwards. But that's exactly why I don't want to play that way in the first place. I much more like to gently push out of the key, pushing into freedom, and then just balancing very comfortably within that freedom. So let's just clarify why I believe that even when people think of relaxing, we're probably doing something very similar. So if I show you with a dumbbell, now you don't have to use a dumbbell yourself. You can do this purely with the weight of the arm, but I'll use this for demonstration purposes. So if I start from here, the force is very big here on the arm just to balance that. Now when I lift it up here, my muscle's contracting. Now it's actually much less effort to stabilise at the top here, and that's where the muscle's most contracted. This is quite counterintuitive, so when I come into the eccentric part of the movement, the force is much larger, even though the muscle's releasing. If I take it back up again, the muscle's contracting, and the force becomes smaller, because here, this is the most advantaged position. So I'll just put that down and just carry on explaining that. I watched some videos on the subject of exercise science recently, where they had some very good explanations of this. So essentially, in terms of the gravity, mechanically speaking, at this point here, the force is much, much larger due to the angle in relation to gravity. Once you get here, the muscle must stay contracted. If it doesn't do that, you're just going to fall back down again. But the force to sustain that contraction is much less once you get to the most advantaged position. And if you're in a disadvantaged position, more in the middle of the range, that force is much larger. So I believe that explains most things at the piano, most likely. If I come back to the keyboard and show that again. Now the difference here, with the dumbbell there, with the bicep, we were closing in the joints here. The difference at the piano is it's likely to be more the extensors, the muscles that extend the fingers. So if I'm in the mid-range here, those muscles have to work a lot harder. If I push through and then stay in that balance, it's the opposite way round. We're extending this time rather than contracting. But the premise is the same. Once I get more tall with a hand, lift the bridge of the hand, I'm working much less hard here with those muscles. The force is larger down here, but you finish contracting the extensors, get the hand tall, and the force is much smaller. So I think that makes sense of it there. Although I have to hold on to that contraction to make sure that I'm nice and free, the force is much smaller. So for some people, if they do the same thing, they may be noticing a reduction in force once they get into the most advantaged position. They may feel that's a relaxation. For myself, I have to notice the fact that there's still some contraction there. The force doesn't fall to zero. The contraction particularly can't fall to nothing. There's something going on when I do this, and that sustains it, and that's what buys the freedom for my wrist, my arm. All of these things follow back from there by having just the right amount of activation remaining to keep the hand in its most advantaged position. Relax that, literally, and you're immediately at a big disadvantage. So I hope that's a credible explanation as to why some of us need a very different point of view, but really we're probably all looking for the same thing under the surface.